Hello, everybody. My name is Tim Daniel. His name is Seth Shaner, filling in for Ben Brown this week. And welcome to this week's edition of Late Night Reds, part of the Riverfront Podcast Network, brought to you by the wonderful people at Blue Wire. Seth, thanks for hanging out tonight. I definitely appreciate that. Not only you joined, but you joined on short notice. It's very appreciated.
Yeah, that's all right. I wanted to fill in these shoes a little bit. I know I can't do it completely, but Ben Brown, man, love that guy. So glad to step in when he's not around tonight.
Yeah, so Ben is Cooper went to the state championship last night and unfortunately did take the loss, but had a hell of a year. 14-1 regular, 14-1 season overall. So Ben did not get back from Lexington until very late last night. So I said, don't even worry about it, because next week's the week you want to be here anyway. It's the season finale of Late Night Reds before we close the book on the year, unless the Reds have some crazy transaction happen. And we will be, Seth and I right now are basically running the Riverfront. So one of us will be doing the Friday show, whether even when Late Night Reds is done for the rest of the year. But it'll be our Christmas movie draft. We're going to discuss our favorite Christmas movies and see who puts together the best list. And it's going to be myself, Seth, Ben, Jack Mueller from Riverfront U, Ted Brennan from Riverfront U is going to try to make it, Sean Mackey from NBA Happy Hour. And I'm hoping Chad and Nate, so they're going to see what they can do to be there, because I don't know. I guess they still own this place, but I don't know what their affiliation is anymore. They just, are too cool for school now.
Tim, I want to tell you, I love my family very, very, very much.
Mm-hmm.
But I would like nothing else than to jump on here for an emergency pod anywhere between next Sunday and the end of the year. That would be stupendous. That would be great.
Yes, absolutely. Carrie's in the house today. She says she just watched Major League last night. That's definitely a classic. We referenced that movie quite a bit, but let's get to a little Reds news, and then we will go ahead and we will do a really fun list today. Seth and I were kind of splitting this in text message the other day, just talking about guys who had great Major League careers and not so great Reds tenures, and just something we're going to get a little kick out of, a little laugh out of, just some randos who played for the Reds who had incredible careers, like I said, and we will go ahead and get to that as well. But let's start with obviously the big news in Cincinnati and Reds land, and that is one Dave Parker going to Cooperstown on the Veterans Committee. So he'll be part of the 2025 class. Awesome news for an awesome guy. I told the story probably over the summer. I met Dave Parker and he signed a ball for me. This is about 2012, I want to say. He had been diagnosed at the time with his Parkinson's, unfortunately. So the signature, he accidentally smeared it. And he told me, he's like, I can happily sign it again if you want me to. I said, no, Dave, that's okay. I'm just happy I got to meet you. Thank you so much. And so I still have the ball. So it's still hanging up. It's still on my display. So I just really happy I got to meet Dave Parker, and he was awesome and really cool. And obviously I know that his career will mostly be known as a Pittsburgh Pirate, but obviously had some Reds moments that none of us will ever forget.
Well, you can blame Dave Parker for the huge shelving system of baseball cards I have in my basement.
Yeah.
In 1987, I went after church down to the local kind of like the truck stop type, stop and go 7-Eleven type place, and walked in there and bought a pack of the mini 1987. I think they were called League Leaders. Topps put out. They were smaller cards, and I go through those, and however many cards you got, I got a Dave Parker, the only red I got, and I was just so thrilled to get a Cincinnati red. I learned all about who he was almost immediately, and ever since then, it's been baseball cards, and I always cherish that one card. That was the first one.
Yeah. So Seth and I are talking about, side note, we are for sure at some point going to do a full episode on Reds baseball cards and our favorite players to collect and how we got into it and things like that. So keep an eye out for that in the future. It's going to happen. But yeah, man, absolutely. Just really cool to see him get in. I think the Veterans Committee is a great idea for these guys who got overlooked. You saw it in the NFL side as well. Ken Riley for the Bengals got in a couple years ago, and I actually reached out to Ken Riley Jr. and told him how Ken Riley was my dad's favorite player.
Oh,
And I have a cool story about my dad that I'll tell on the show today too, as well. And he wrote me back and was like, "That's really cool." He's like, "I'm really sorry that you lost your dad." He's like, "Unfortunately, neither of our dads will be here to see it, but I know they're both very proud." So that was a really cool moment and something I really appreciated. So shout out Dave Parker. Um, you and I kind of talked about other names who definitely should be considered for that list. Guys like Dale Murphy, who 1,000%, I mean, one of the greatest Braves of all time for that franchise. If you're one of the best players to ever wear that uniform, yeah, that's
Yeah.
probably something to say there as well. So I have a feeling he'll get in at some point. Mr. Wants, if Dave Parker gets in the Hall of Fame, Joey Votto is definitely Hall of Famer. No question. Absolute no question.
He already was, but yes. Yeah, Dave Parker and certainly Murphy. I think Murphy and Mattingly, I feel like they're just slightly younger than the Harold Baineses and the Dave Parkers of the world. And we could talk about Baines. That's the only negative about the Veterans Committee is sometimes whoever votes on it is stacked with. I mean, you looked at that group that voted Baines in, and it was Tony La Russa and a bunch of his guys, and it's like,
Yeah.
wait a minute, Baines played for you, and you're going to vote for a guy that played for you. That makes you look better if you manage more Hall of Famers. But no, I think your point's very well taken. There's been some guys that got missed. I think Jack Morris was one that got rectified, and I see this and I think, oh my goodness, you brought up one off air, and it's even further back, so I worry it might not. And it's Veda Pinson, and Veda had over 2,500 hits, and if you look at his numbers, they're very much in line with kind of what we value now, as far as just across the board, so good. And his speed was just amazing. And really, he just happened to play with Frank Robinson, whose numbers were just a touch better.
Yeah, for sure. So David kind of goes into detail here. Parker was the second ever free agent signing, and then eventually was traded for Jose Rio. That's a win-win in Reds history, right?
Well, the middle point he makes, the culture he brought, he taught guys like Barry Larkin and Eric Davis not only how to be big leaguers, but then how to lead themselves. Like once Dave, I mean, it's kind of the timing's perfect because he taught those guys. They talk about it all the time. You can read about it. Barry Larkin and Eric Davis give so much credit to Dave Parker, but then when he gets traded, he moves on. But yet there's that 2 or 3 year period leading into 1990 when Eric Davis and Barry Larkin just become leaders. And it happened just like that. And certainly I know, like, I think the Reds players voted King Griffey Sr. a share of the playoff money that year, even though he had got let go so he could go play with Junior during that season. But certainly Dave Parker had a lot to do with those younger guys coming along, and you've got the Paul O'Neills and eventually Chris Sabo, but they were coming up through the system and they had somebody to look up to.
Yeah, absolutely. So kudos to Dave Parker. That's a really awesome. I'm really happy for him. I think the day that Joey gets inducted, we need to make sure we do a Riverfront live show from like some restaurant or bar in Cooperstown. What say you?
Yeah, I'm there.
Yeah.
I've been twice to
I've been
Cooperstown.
once.
I've
Yeah.
never gone during an induction. Yeah, I think certainly that would be amazing to do.
Yeah, so it's funny you say that. So I went in 2000, but I went after the induction. So this was the year
Oh yeah,
Tony gets it.
yeah,
Tony, Sparky,
and Marty.
and Marty.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so I got to go and see all their displays and stuff. And it was the day that so that day you walk around all the displays and it's really, really cool for people who have been, they know exactly what I'm talking about, but like the museum portion of it is even cooler than the Hall of Fame portion.
Mm-hmm.
And there was a big cutout on one wall because I think there's like a section. Remember, this is 25 years ago, where every team has a little bit of has like a locker kind of thing where it has a big display. And the Oakland one was Vita Blue.
Mm-hmm.
And my dad told me the story.
Yeah.
I was 10, so this was mind blowing to me. I was 10 at this time, so he's telling me the story about when the Reds traded for Vita Blue, and baseball stopped it, and basically says because the Reds were too good. So I don't know if that's the truth to portion of it, but it certainly was something that really kind of shocked me because I'd never heard the story before at the time, but now it's kind of lived on in like legend almost. It's almost like the Chris Paul Lakers trade. It's kind of how
it's there. I mean,
yeah,
it's definitely true. I mean, it's right up there with stuff in the ballot box, so that every Reds regular could start in the All-Star game and stuff like that. things that could happen back before the internet and those sorts of things. But the Hall of Fame, yeah, just amazing place. And I will tell you that 2000, my wife and I were still just dating at the time, and she got every opportunity to see how crazy I was because we're driving near a mall here in Columbus, and I'm forcing her to listen to the induction speeches, and I'm like, hey, you later on, I'm like, hey, you still married me after that, so.
Yeah. The day Griffey got inducted was my birthday, which I thought was fitting because he's my favorite player of all time. So, always thought that was cool. I wanted to be there so bad, but it didn't work out. But the day Joey gets inducted, I will 1,000% be there. So I'm really, really, really excited to see how that shakes out. Excuse me. So some Reds transaction news. There's not a whole lot. There's a lot of rumblings and rumors going around right now. I talked on Thursday with Jeff Carr about Garrett Crochet and Jesse Winker. I very much am out on the Jesse Winker situation. I'm very much in on the Garrett Crochet situation, if that's true. But today, MLB Trade Rumors put something out, Seth, and I'm curious your thoughts on this about the Reds having interest in Lane Thomas and Josh Naylor. And realistically, if they could get both guys, I would really like it. I know Lane Thomas kind of is more of a platoon guy, hits lefties really well, not so good against righties. And Josh Naylor didn't have his best year last year, but I'm a big Josh Naylor fan, and he's very loved in Cleveland. So I'm curious if this is Francona trying to get one of his guys, because he never managed Lane Thomas, obviously.
Right.
But genuinely curious if this was if this is a real thing. Is this the Guardians potentially signaling that? I don't know. The Guardians aren't one of those teams that ever loses, right? You think they're going to rebuild and they win 2 years later. They're like the Pacers.
Yeah, they cut guys loose. They're like, I remember in the 90s when the Braves, remember we got Rob Bell, and even when we got Steve Avery, even talking to Denny Nagel the other day, it's like, wait a minute, Steve Avery's arm was basically falling off by the time the Reds signed him. But the Rob Bell deal was like, well, wait a minute, what do the Braves know that Jim Bowden didn't know?
Yeah.
Because the Braves don't just let guys like that go unless he's not, whatever. But whatever. So at the end of the day, with the Guardians, even the Indians back when they were named that, it's they cut bait at the exact right time. And that doesn't mean the guy's going to be bad going forward, but they just know how to work that system.
Right.
To bring in the next guy that's going to be great. I think of like Bartolo Colon, like he was almost traded to the Reds for a package that would not have been that good. That summer is the one that gets me, 2002. They were going to get Bartolo Colon and Scott Rowland in 2002. Scott Rowland from the Phillies.
Yeah.
And ownership turned it all down. Couldn't do it. And they ended up getting they got Grady Sizemore, Brandon Phillips, and Cliff Lee.
That's right.
For Bartolo Colon. So think about that. Colon goes on to have a great career, not just with the Expos, obviously, but later on. And they knew they weren't going to sign him. And it was like a year or so before then. And it's like, okay, let's pull in these prospects. And they end up getting 3 bona fide, like, good players. Now, Phillips never, matured into that for them, but he did for the Reds, obviously. I don't know. I'd be great with it. Naylor is the epitome of a Francona guy, I think, and there's a reason he would want him. And the funny thing with Lane Thomas is I'm a huge Tony Kornheiser fan. I listened to Tony Kornheiser since like 1999 when he was on ESPN Radio, and I listened to basically every podcast he's ever had.
By the way, he's incredible when he talks the history of the NBA. He's one of my favorite historians.
Very well, ABA too, because he was in on Julius Erving and all that with the Nets. But Kornheiser lives in DC, and he's a huge Nationals fan just because he loves having the baseball game on. Yeah, we did, Mr. One. Absolutely. So Kornheiser loved Lane Thomas. He was absolutely chagrined when they traded him to the Guardians. And then he stunk for that first month.
Yeah, he did.
He was awful for the Guardians for the first whole month he was there, all of like August. And then all of a sudden in September and in October, he was great.
He was great in the playoffs.
Yeah. So Kornheiser, I always, the guys he likes or doesn't like, I always kind of latch on to. And so it's funny that Lane Thomas, he could become a Red. When we signed Dom Smith, like that was crazy because Kornheiser the year before,
he could be on our list right here that we're going to go through later.
Well, I don't even know if he's been that good anywhere else because when he was with the Nats, Like he'd say it'd be 8-1, and he'd hit a solo home run.
Yeah.
And, there's guys like that you look it up and it's not really true, but it just seems like there's no clutchness to him. And that was Dom Smith. So when the Reds got Dom Smith, I just did the face palm. I was like, oh no.
He had a couple good months with the Mets in
Yeah.
his 3 or 4 years he was there. He had a good month here and there.
Yeah. Yeah, Mr. One. I'd love to talk sometime about almost having Cologne and Roland. I think actually I was at the Reds Cardinals game in St. Louis, and I was on the way back to Ohio when all that went down. It wasn't a good time.
Yeah, it's I'm trying to think. I think the one time I was at a game when a guy got traded was 2011. I was at the game when Johnny Gomes got traded to the Nationals.
Okay.
And I remember seeing he was in the lineup, get to the game, and all of a sudden he wasn't in the lineup, and I had no idea what was going on. And all of a sudden, I think it was right after his bobblehead game because
I think you're about right on that.
yeah,
I was in Detroit for Reds Tigers, and the Reds still had. It was like the second or third time they had Hal Morris, and they sent Hal Morris across he literally walked, almost dug out the dugout. I think even out in the open, and I was at the game either that day or the day before, and they traded him to the Tigers while they were in Detroit.
They did the same thing with Devin Mesoraco. They traded him to the Mets in Cincinnati. The Mets were in town facing the Reds. And he said that he went and talked to Walt Jocketty the next day in his full Mets gear, went to his office. And he was like, this is so weird.
Well, we could do a show just on trades.
Yeah.
Even talking to Denny Nagel, I recognized even at the time how good it was to get Denny Nagel.
Mm-hmm.
But I was in a funk. It was like a Friday night. And listen, I wasn't a guy at college that went to bars necessarily. A big group of friends would usually go out to eat, and then we'd end up, hanging out or being on campus or whatever. And I remember I had to get shaken out of just this doldrums of we traded Brett Boone. I was so upset. But the one that got me the most probably was Jeff Shaw.
Yeah.
Basically, he was the first time he ever wore a Dodgers uniform was at the All-Star game because the Reds traded him on the Sunday before the All-Star break to the Dodgers after they'd given them the hometown discount, and he was so mad. He was so mad.
Who else was when Jeff Samardzija got traded from the Cubs to the A's? He was elected an All-Star with the Cubs.
Yeah,
and wore his A's gear. In the All-Star game. I don't think he played, but the Roberto Kelly trade. That's a big one. That's one that's really fascinating when you look at the numbers.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah, that's a good one. That's a fun one.
Well, we got Kelly for Paul O'Neill, and then we flipped Kelly for Deion Sanders.
Yeah.
I was in a Babe Ruth baseball game the day they got Deion Sanders for Roberto Kelly. I got in a car after the game, and they had it on the radio.
Oh, man. That's going to be funny because I have a couple guys from that 97 Reds team. The year Deion was actually pretty damn good for the Reds.
That's when he came back because it was
95 was the trade.
The Reds in 94, and then he got traded away from the Reds in 95 for Mark Portugal and Darren Lewis and Dave Martinez, the Nationals manager.
Yeah. Because wasn't it he said that he wanted to play for the Reds and the Bengals, but Mike Brown wouldn't sign him?
He talked about that, and the whole thing, of course, was kind of the low point of his life and all that. And Barry Larkin was a help there, and even God, obviously, he learned to get in touch more with God and that sort of thing. But his low point was in Cincinnati, and then he brought himself up out of that. And so I think he did. He wanted to stay. And of course, he gets traded. He ended up playing for the 49ers after he was traded to the Giants. So he was actually in San Francisco for both teams.
Yeah, because Deion's double play is one of my least favorite 30 for 30s, even though I love Deion. It's just I feel like it was not very well put together.
I could watch Tim McCarver get an ice bucket dumped on him over and over.
I guess that's a win. Yeah, that's absolutely a win. But yeah, that could be a fun thing. When each year got traded by the Mariners to the Yankees, that was in Safeco.
Oh wow!
So there's a few of those. Doug Mankiewicz to the Red Sox. They talk about that on the 2004 Red Sox Netflix doc.
Oh, you finally watched it?
I finally watched it. I've watched it this week. It was very good. I really liked it. But if I spoiled that for somebody, I apologize. But I think everyone knew Doug Mankiewicz played for the Red Sox that year. So
yeah.
All right, Seth. Well, I want to do a really fun show today, just kind of talking random things because we're at this point in the year and no news is coming out. And so what I wanted to do is kind of do a fun thing where I looked at guys who had really good to great major league careers, but not so great stints with the Reds. And what I mean by that in the random Reds is not necessarily your Shin-Soo Choos and your Greg Vaughns who were here for 1 year and were awesome.
Mm-hmm.
Or your like I also didn't want to do like your Ryan Madsons who were here and never pitched for the Reds because they got hurt. This was more of the guys who were mainstays who have big major league names, had to stop with the Reds that you're like, I don't want to talk about it.
Yeah, and you're not talking about Jeff Hoffman, who
right
never even made it to the Reds, or even Justin Turner, who had a great career at the Dodgers and then a few other teams, but was actually a Reds farmhand. Yeah, so you're talking about guys who kind of were retreads that just didn't work out.
Yeah,
they were great somewhere else. Like Tony Fernandez worked out great because he couldn't find anywhere. Bowden signed him in '94, made him play third base, and he was bitter about that, but he was great that year. And obviously, he went off to play shortstop later on somewhere else, so he didn't stay.
Yeah, like Kevin Mitchell, Ron Gant, they're not on this list because they were good Reds for their short time there with us.
Very good.
These are the randos who are here for like 20 to 60 games. You're like, oh my God, that guy was really good in baseball. He played for the Reds for a short time. So I want to start here because this guy actually was a starting pitcher in a game, Seth, that I went to. It's one of my favorite games I ever went to. And the first guy I want to talk about is Dontrelle Willis. So Dontrelle Willis, before he went to the Reds, was the Rookie of the Year in 2001. He was a World Series champion in 2003 with the Marlins. Was honestly, you can make the case. There weren't many people who were better athletes than Dontrelle Willis, and he was a pitcher. Also, everyone knows him as a pitcher who could rake as well. He goes to the Tigers, has an okay tenure, very up and down. The Reds get him on the dirt cheap in 2010 in the winter meetings in a minor league deal. And I wanted to kind of bring that up because I met him at Reds Fest that year. And he was extremely cool, Seth. So his numbers in Cincinnati don't look very good. 1-6 with a 5 is what he kind of had. But if you look at the game by game, had a lot of really good games for the Reds. Just towards the end of the stretch, just had a couple where he got beat pretty bad, didn't last too long. But has some games I really remember. So the game I'm mentioning that I really loved was 2011 Sunday Night Baseball against the Braves. It's the first Sunday Night Baseball game in GABP history. The Reds win on a Drew Stubbs walk-off. I got to tell Drew the story of being at that game. And Dontrelle Willis was really good in that game. I also went to a game where they played the Nationals on a Friday night. He threw 7 innings and batted 3 for 3. Mm-hmm. I'll never forget when they were at Minute Maid Park and he hit a homer against the Astros. So he was awesome at those times. And I know his Reds tenure was something where it didn't go the way that you wanted it. But if you remember, Seth, I don't know how much you really recollect of his time here, but do you remember like those first 3 or 4 starts? He looked really good, and we thought like we found Dontrelle Willis again.
We did, and the funny thing is, my friend Matt Andrews, who I've had on Red Lake Roundtable, Matt was calling Louisville Bats games at the time, and he didn't make the big league team, and so he had to start out in Louisville. He had a 2.63 ERA down in AAA, and one of the cool things was, and I don't think Matt would mind me sharing this. When they came to Columbus, Matt and I met at Ohio State, and Matt, after he graduated, moved to Louisville and got the job down there. And I think somebody told Dontrelle, hey, Matt Andrews has been, he's from here. This is his town. And so he kind of sidled up to Matt and said, where do I go to eat? And he was like, trying to get what he meant. Like, do you want like, a local dive, a diner? And he's like, no, man, steakhouse. Nice. Where do I go? And he sent him Hyde Park here in Columbus is very, very nice. And so he ended up at Hyde Park Steakhouse. And I think he told him afterward, hey, that was a good place. but yeah, Matt spoke highly of him in this time. And that's the thing too. A lot of those guys, and I didn't send you, like Jason Isringhausen. Mm-hmm. Isringhausen did not put up good numbers for the Reds. He had a great career after he was supposed to be the great starting pitcher of the Mets. He had injuries and things like that. He ended up great closer for the awful Cardinals. Just did great. Was with the A's too during some of that time.
Yeah.
And probably actually had his first great couple years there. But when he was trying to kind of hang on and he was down in Louisville, it was toward the end of the season even, and he was sticking with it, hoping to get called back up. And I remember Matt talking to me about just how great he was with the young players. Because the big league guys have money, and those guys down there don't.
Yeah.
And even though they might only be there a couple weeks or even a month, you can tell a lot about a guy by how much he takes care of him. And that was a huge thing with Jason Isringhausen. So he's on that list too. He didn't play very well for the Reds, but definitely had a great career otherwise.
Yeah. So the one thing I was going to tell about Dontrell that I wanted to do before we moved on, and that I really made me laugh. So I remember he's, like I said, he signed. He goes to Reds Fest, which was kind of shocking because he signed, I think, a week or so before. And do you remember they used to do the radio booth where Lance and Mo and those guys would be? And
Yeah.
Dontrell was doing an interview with Lance, and he's like, "Yeah, I'm really excited about this team because they just won the Central. It was the 2010 playoff team." He's like, "I'm really excited I get to hit again." And hit really well for the Reds. So want to make sure I gave Dontrell his love. I know what the numbers say, but I remember him being very good in stretches that year for the Reds. So they ended up going to play for the Phillies, and I think that's where he ended up retiring. I think he had a minor league stint where he signed a minor league deal with the Cubs and didn't
Yeah,
play
he
for
had
very long.
a lot of minor league, like even through 2014. I mean, he was all over the place. Actually, the Reds in 2011, I believe, were his last big league stop.
Yeah.
And so, 2012, 13, and 14, he was independent ball in 12 and 13 and 14 at different times. He did sign and he pitched in Fresno for the Giants organization.
Oh yeah.
But yeah, other than that, it was just trying to find a spot. And as much as that sometimes is sad, I actually respect it quite a bit because
Me too.
a guy who the guy was, Major League Baseball was cashing in on his awesome wind up and his exciting way
Yeah,
of doing
dude.
things. And yeah, it was a huge deal like that in that early aughts, the '03 range with the World Series and all that.
Marlins legend, Dontrell Willis. So
Absolutely.
here's one from the same year that wasn't necessarily a great major leaguer, but had moments. And when he signed with the Reds, a lot of people thought was going to be awesome. And that is one Fred Lewis, who came in to be the great platoon in left field with Johnny Gomes and Lance Nix. Lance Nix. So Fred Lewis, who, if I remember correctly, had a really good year with the Blue Jays the year before. Or was it the Giants? It was one of those two.
He was a Florida Gator too, I think.
He was a Florida Gator. Yeah. But ended up playing about 81 games for the Reds that year because he started off injured. And they brought him in to kind of be this power hitting lefty who could get on base, power hitting righty who could get on base. And he was not that. He had a 638 OPS. He had 3 home runs. I was at one of the games he had a home run because he hit it on Cinco de Mayo, and it was a rain delay. So there looked like there was probably about 100 people in the stadium. But Fred Lewis was someone who did not live up to his potential. He's next year he goes to the Mets for about 20 games and is never to be seen again. I think he played in Japan for a little bit after that, actually.
Yeah, he was one of those guys. I joined Twitter in 2009, and there were still some guys that I followed on the Reds. Just he's a Red, I'll follow him. And I remember like 5 or 6 years later, out of nowhere, he started tweeting again. And I'm like, what? Why am I following this guy? Yeah, but his biggest year was with the Giants in 09, and then 10 he did okay with the Blue Jays. But yeah, he wasn't going to be an everyday guy necessarily. I had a few, and they come from maybe the '90s, and the funniest was when guys with facial hair, everywhere
Oh
else
yeah,
would come, and so I put Lee Smith, Frank Viola, and Mike Morgan. And
I
I
forgot
know,
Lee Smith was with the Reds.
yeah, I had a list one time where you could list almost every. It was before well, Hoffman was with the Reds, obviously in the farm system was mentioned, but obviously Mariano Rivera never was. But before Rivera rose up the ranks completely, you could almost list every closer in the saves list and say he pitched for the Reds at some point. And it was always like a reclamation project. And I will say that I will say during remember the All-Star game being in town, they had the
Yeah,
big at the Duke Energy Center, they had a huge fan fest, and they would have guys just signing autographs. You could walk right up,
yeah,
and it wouldn't even be a line. You just,
it was cool.
and I remember Fergie Jenkins was there, but Raleigh Fingers was there. And I walked up to Raleigh Fingers and I said, "Is it true that you had signed with the Reds and Marge is going to make you shave your mustache, and you decided not to. And he looked at Fergie Jenkins and smirked, and he goes, "Yep, it's absolutely true." And he's like, so we could have had him on the list. Raleigh Fingers could have been on the list, but he wasn't going to shave the handlebar. And
Yeah,
Marge, thank goodness that Greg Vaughn prevailed back in '99. But
no
yeah,
kidding.
those guys. And the one I wrote down too, Kent Tekulve, at one time he had the record for the most appearances by any pitcher. And the big deal there was that he was friends with Pete Rose, and Pete got him on the team just so he could ride out that record and get it. So he had no numbers to speak of for the Reds, and of course Vince Coleman,
Yeah.
about 60 pounds heavier probably. Hey, we called the Cardinals and got your sizes from your playing days there. But this doesn't seem to fit you, Vince.
Yeah. Why couldn't we have gotten like 1999 Ricky Henderson? You know
Yeah.
what I mean? Where it was like he was still somewhat good and in shape for the Mets. And
Yeah. I
man,
told you that story about at the '99 playoff game, and guys
yeah.
are throwing quarters at him, and he doesn't even like get mad. He looks at him and he picks them up and he put them in his back pocket, every single one.
I
It's
mean,
like,
the story about how he framed the check for $1 million is like an all time. Um, there's a website called Rickyisms where you can
yeah,
literally see all the weird things he did. And the David Cross spit on him is my favorite too. It's so funny. Um, so a couple of names have popped up in the chat that made me laugh. Luke Weaver, who just all of a sudden had this incredible run with the Yankees this year. I forgot to put Jim Edmonds on the list, but that was
yeah,
for
he was on my
intentional.
list. Yeah,
That was
and
intentional that I not put
I
Jim Edmonds
said
on the list.
Jim Edmonds, and then I ducked. Yeah, Jeff Reardon was another one. John with the had to shave his beard. He looked completely different.
Yeah.
And I think they even had like Steve Bedrosian at one point too.
This is one that kind of makes me laugh. Ruben Sierra
Yeah,
was with the Reds in '97.
well, the crazy thing about that is he actually had good years or good. He was a good bit
He won a
player
batting title.
later. Yeah, but even like he was on, I think the '99 or 2000 Yankees team that won,
2002, yeah.
and he was a key player for them. And yeah, they didn't keep him long enough, or he just didn't have it for the Reds.
Yeah. So here's a funny story about those 2 home runs. I was at one of those games. It was off Kurt Schilling.
Mm,
They're playing the Phillies at GABP. Terry Francona was the manager of the Phillies at the time. And the Reds win that game 10-2. The next game, they're off that Monday. Then they go play the Mets on Tuesday at Shea. They lose 15-2. That was his second home run. So it's 2 home runs worth the Reds in back-to-back games.
yeah,
But yeah, this is a guy who, with the Rangers, had won a batting title, was in top 4 in the MVP voting one year. Incredibly talented guy. And like you said, goes to Seattle, has a nice run, goes back to the Rangers for a little bit, plays for that Yankees team. He was part of that Yankee dynasty team that won a few titles. And he was like a big time player for them.
mhm.
So I thought he was a funny one because somehow I saw one of his 2 home runs in Cincinnati.
Well, even a couple more random ones: Matt Kemp and Matt Harvey.
I was gonna bring up Matt Kemp.
Yeah,
You're bearing the lead, Seth.
sorry.
You mentioned this one off air, so I wanted to make sure I got a laugh out of this one. Former National League MVP Terry Pendleton,
Yeah,
50 games with the Reds in the same year.
yeah, they couldn't decide if they wanted to play Willie Green or like. That's the thing, here in Columbus, you know, Chris Holtman got fired last year as a basketball coach, and at one point the AD told him, "You have to go with these young guys, and we're going to play young guys." And so he used that as his mantra. Well, that's why we're losing. But he would get these transfers in, and he would just play these guys that weren't that good over these young guys. And I felt like that was kind of what Jim Bowden would really talk up a guy like Willie Green, but then he'd sign 3 retread third basemen to maybe play ahead of him.
Yeah. Bob once mentioned one earlier. I forgot to put on the list. Dante Bichette.
Yeah, and that one, we've talked about that a lot as I've talked to people, and even on Red Leg Roundtable, if I've talked to guys from that 1999 team, it's like they bring it up. Like, well, they had to get Griffey, but man, what if we would have kept Cameron and Vaughn and tried to run it back? And it's like, I thought, hey, Griffey plus Bichette? I mean, that's And and it turned out I don't think Vaughn's career after that, even in Tampa Bay, he didn't do nearly as much as he did that year for the Reds. So
Right.
I was
Yeah.
kind of like, well, I think it'll be all right. We'll be, Griffey's the best player in baseball for one, and then we'll be fine, And then Bichette, man, I'll tell you something about that. When I was at Comerica Park, and I think it would have been about the same time they traded Hal Morris. I'm there for batting practice, and that was when they had the fences way back all the way
Mhm.
around. And I'm telling you, Tim, in batting practice, Dante Bichette was having a hard time getting it over the left field wall. And I'm talking batting practice.
And
Like
he got traded to the Red Sox.
these fly balls are landing short of the warning track in
Yeah.
batting practice. And I was like, whoa, number one, these walls are really far for one. But number two, that's your power hitter right there. What's going on?
Yeah. And you guys have get traded to Boston of all places.
Yeah.
So you mentioned him. Matt Kemp.
Mm-hmm.
20 games with the Reds. Nice solid 283 slugging. This is a guy who obviously everyone knows. Multi-time All-Star. Really should have been the 2011 MVP instead of Ryan Braun. Even before the suspension for the PEDs, I thought Kemp was better than Braun that year. Honestly. I mean, he was a homer away from being 40-40. But and the next year was the year when he had that crazy start where he had like 18 home runs in April. So he goes to San Diego, goes to Atlanta, goes back to the Dodgers. Actually, the year before he gets traded to the Reds, was an all-star for the Dodgers. And then has this really bad tenure with the Reds. The next year is playing for the Colorado Rockies in the COVID year and has an okay numbers, but was never to be seen again. Last I heard, I think he is actually a part of the Dodgers coaching staff. I don't know if he's on the major league club or not, or if he's a minor league rover or something. But I remember, and I don't remember. I mean, the Homer Bailey trade's one that we talk about forever because, well, obviously, no one that the Reds got in that trade is is in the organization anymore. But also, Kemp gets DFA'd and had a decent spring, so you thought maybe you got something there. We know Puig obviously gets traded while fighting the Pirates.
The best.
Yeah, Kyle Farmer hung on for a while with the
Yeah.
team, obviously, and then Alex Wood has kind of had some good seasons since then, and had a lot of injury riddled seasons as well.
He could be on this list a little bit. I mean, he
Yeah,
had better years obviously before he came to Cincinnati.
yeah. Mr. One brings up Benito Santiago. That's a funny one because he was a 2-time Red.
Yeah, and he played really well for the Reds.
He
I mean, he
did.
was so good. I don't think he goes on this list because we're talking guys that kind of
Yeah,
were not even close to hit or miss. They just were missed. Yeah, I mean, those guys that trade though makes total sense still.
total sense. Yeah,
Because
you
even
get off the money.
you get out from under that money for Homer, and then guys could actually contribute on a team that didn't have any depth at all. Hey, I suppose if you were going to name this segment, and you put it under like a memorial name or something like that, the original guy for this category is Christy Mathewson.
That's true.
Yeah,
That's
see,
true.
I mean, it's a little bit of World War I mixed in, and got him and said, he doesn't have it anymore.
Was it Chad that told the story of the Reds tried to borrow Babe Ruth for a spring training game?
I don't know that one.
Yeah, I'd have to look that up. So I have a couple more that I want to list. If you have any more you want to throw up before we end the show, by all means. This is one that's also very funny because this is in the jockey bringing all the Cardinals in era.
Yeah.
But this guy was literally the year before the World Series MVP, and that's Edgar Renteria, who split time with our buddy Paul Janisch. Was not very good with the Reds, but I mean, look, 97 World Series champion, multiple time All-Star, 2010 World Series MVP, comes to the Reds, never plays in the majors again.
Yeah, I mean, you had some of those guys. Rich Aurelia, I mean, he did okay for the Reds, but certainly his better days were before then. Yeah, it's interesting to think about that because Jocketty did that, didn't he? I mean,
Oh, for sure.
Ryan Ludwig.
But Ryan Ludwig was good in
He was
2012.
good, but he got hurt, and all
Yeah.
that. That kind of doomed things a little bit. But there were so many guys like that you brought over that had played for St. Louis, and it's like, let's get away from these guys,
Yeah. Next two are two very easy forgets because they crack me up. Yvonne Gallardo pitched for the Reds. Do people remember this? 3 starts, 2 1/3 innings, only 2 strikeouts, 8 earned runs on 8 hits, and ended up playing got DFA'd immediately. And you know what's so funny about this? When the Reds got him, they brought him in. I said, "Oh yeah, he's worth a chance. He'll probably be really good here." Nope, not even close.
Well, he helped get Brian Price fired.
That's true. He did help that.
Yeah, no, that was bad. That was so bad. That stretch wasn't that 3-18 or whatever
That
start
was
they
pretty
had?
rough. Yeah.
Yeah. I mentioned Rich Aurelio. You had Royce Clayton in the infamous
Tony Womack.
trade, Tony Womack,
Yeah.
even D'Angelo Jimenez.
Mm-hmm. Corey Patterson kind of counts because he was with the Reds longer than 50 games, but he was really, really bad that year. I thought he was going to be good too. Maybe I was just an idiot. Maybe I don't know what I'm talking about.
Well, the Tony Womack thing is funny because then that begot getting Brandon Phillips.
Yeah.
Just didn't work out, and it was obvious right away.
Yeah.
You know, Jeff Conine played for a little bit there.
Yeah. Oh man, Adam says the spring training invites. That's Josh Harrison just this last year would be on this list because he had a couple years with the Pirates. All right, my last one that I made a slide for, and you kind of, I wouldn't say you disagree with me, but you kind of, when I sent you the list, you kind of had a little, but Eddie Guardado. So Eddie Guardado was awesome with the Twins. Actually, I think at one point, I don't know if he still does or not, is the Twins' all-time saves leader. Had a good year had a couple of good years in Seattle, I think, as well, if I remember correctly. Comes to Cincinnati. His first becomes at the trade deadline, and I want to say in 06, and is really good. And then 07 just kind of looks like he just kind of lost it all.
Yeah, and I think that's where I have to draw the line on. He came in 06, and I thought he gave them a boost. You know, they needed him badly when he came. So I'm a little torn on that one because I thought
it makes sense.
His arm was hanging, but he earned that name every day Eddie when he was with the Twins in Seattle even. But yeah, but the crazy thing is he pitched till 2009.
I know.
He left the Reds in 07. I mean, he had a 1.29 ERA with the Reds in 06 after they got him.
Yeah, and then 07 it look.
Right. And that's
fair.
That's what we've learned about relievers. I mean,
yeah.
And he had a huge long career before then. He had two All-Star appearances. But we learned that about relievers now. It falls off.
It really does. Yeah. Like I saw the money the Pirates gave Chapman compared to the money the Red Sox gave Chapman when he was actually pretty decent for the Pirates was pretty shocking to me. But that's neither here nor there. So another name that popped in my head, and then I'll stop this here, that I wanted to laugh at for a second was Eric Milton.
Yes. Oh, that was bad.
That was really bad.
We couldn't laugh about that 20 years ago.
Nope, we could not. He was the opening day starter that year, wasn't he?
I think so. I mean, you look at that era, Jimmy Haynes, Joey Hamilton, who was already mentioned in this list.
Yeah.
Corey Lytle, rest in peace.
Man. Forgot about Corey Lytle.
The day he died was, he'd already gone to the Yankees by then, but my goodness, it's like when you're a huge fan of a team and you there's something Chris Garber and I talked about recently. It's when you talk about a team all the time, you're watching them day in and day out a whole summer. You get to know them, and I'm talking even before social media, before we could watch every game on TV. You got to know these guys, and boy, to see Corey Lytle die, that just now seeing him on the rubber as an opening day starter was pretty demoralizing too. So, yeah, Joey Hamilton and Jimmy Haynes. There was an Anderson, right, that had pitched for the Pirates before. And one of those guys, like C. Trent Rosecrans, knew when he was a kid or something like that, and Jimmy Anderson maybe was his name. Yeah, that was a bad stretch. That's why we felt so blessed there in 2012 and in that era. Like, and then even what they put together in 2020 and 21. I mean,
there we go.
Yeah, Jimmy Anderson. Yep.
So Adam Lee asked, and this is funny because you just told the story on Red Lake Roundtable with Denny Nagel.
Yeah.
Was Drew Henson a Red or Tiger? So he was a Red. He was traded from the Yankees for Denny Nagel, who Seth and I have kind of gushed over as a baseball player. And I was a huge Danny Nagel fan, so your interview with him this week was one of my favorites you've done. It's a great episode. But you tell a really funny story about how I don't want to take your thunder here, but George Steinbrenner, the rumor was he convinced
Yeah.
Drew Henson to play baseball so Michigan
Well,
wouldn't beat Ohio State.
yeah, he had his draft rights, and he played in the minors, I think, even while being at Michigan. But he was supposed to be the next big thing. And oh, by the way, they had a guy named Tom Brady that nobody wanted to play because they just wanted to see Henson out there. And yeah, that was the deal at that point. And of course, he came back and played for the Cowboys a little
Yeah,
bit.
he did.
Um,
Backed up Quincy Carter and then ended up starting.
and it was bizarre too because do you know how many times Derek Jeter obviously was drafted out of high school in '92 and went straight up through the system pretty quickly. But he's a Michigan fan. He's from Michigan.
Yeah.
I think Kalamazoo. And
I think he actually said Barry Larkin was his favorite player growing up.
yeah, but then the thing is he played a year or two in Columbus with the Clippers because back then the
That's right.
Clippers were the
Yeah.
Yankees farm system. And it was so bizarre because the Columbus Dispatch is a local paper here, and back when newspapers really mattered. And it was like, this is wild. Drew Henson is standing at third base at Cooper Stadium here in Columbus, and he's not going to be a Michigan quarterback anymore. It's like, oh, yes, thank you. But no, it was just so bizarre, you know. But yeah, he was a Reds farmhand. Did he ever come up?
No, I don't think he did. If I remember correctly, I think the Reds traded his contract somewhere in a later deal.
Well, and he was always flirting with going back. He played. This says he played 8 total games with the Yankees in 02 and 03. So
Oh, did he make it to the big
they
leagues? I
sent
didn't
him
realize
back.
that.
But it's only 5 total games over 2 years.
Yeah, man. Well, the chat brought some really fun names in. Paul Wilson, obviously everyone remembers the Kyle Farnsworth fight. I'll never forget that. Yeah, that's right.
But the Paul Wilson thing, that goes down really poorly because all they had in the stadium that day was like the perch camera up above like home plate, and Kyle Farnsworth charged him.
Yeah.
The camera, I remember Sports Center trying to say that it was the other way around. It was like Paul Wilson came down off the mound and he made like a gesture, or no, he got thrown at and he made a gesture, and all of a sudden, boom, he came after him. Yeah, Willie Mo Pena. Yeah.
Yeah.
Jeter was supposed to be red. The funny thing is, again, you don't draft for need. They just traded Eric Davis, so they said they needed a power hitting outfielder, so they took Chad Mottola. Wait.
I just looked it up. That's it. Carrie scared the shit out of me. I was like, what? So, I guess it says Baltimore Orioles scenario sends Ryan Castle to the Reds on Sports Illustrated. And I was like, freaking out for a second.
Yeah, Adam, the Wilson and Isringhausen and Bill Pulsifer, they were supposed to be the Mets magic, rotation, and all of them at a very early age dropped off. Yeah, Brian Moeller, I remember him coming. He was pretty good for
Detroit, was it?
Detroit, and even Todd Jones, remember?
Yeah,
as well. But yeah,
Todd Coffey was a big deal when he came to town. And ended up being okay, I guess.
not bad.
So I before we got out of here, I wanted to tell. So one of the reasons that sparked this conversation was this week is 2 years since I lost my dad. And I was talking to my wife about today, just kind of like how crazy this is and how wild this is. And I ended up talking to her, and I remembered a baseball game that me and him went to in May of 2011. And Seth, you might remember this game because in May 2011, there was a weekend series when the Redbirds came to town and the Reds swept them. And so why this series jumps out the most is this is the game when Roberto Hernandez hits a home run off Chris Carpenter, and Chris Carpenter delays the game because the smoke from the smokestacks blew onto the field. And so in this game, there's like Paul Janisch in this game, Fred Lewis is in this game. I actually text Paul today. It was like, do you remember this game? I haven't heard back from him. I probably won't. But Fred Lewis played in that game. And so it cracked me up. But I told my wife, I said, I was on TV this game when they pull Carpenter. I found the picture.
Awesome.
It's not going to be a very good picture, but that's me right there on the left, and there's my dad. So I was actually
cool hoodie he's got on.
Yeah, I was actually able to find the photo, and so my dad. That was the one year my dad and I had season tickets together, and it was really cool. So the season wasn't great, but that team was still a lot of fun. They just lost a lot of close games. And that's the only year I got to go to opening day with my dad. And that was the Ramon Hernandez walk-off opening day when they were down 6-3 in the ninth and they came back and won.
That's against the Angels.
No, that was the Brewers.
Oh, you're right.
Yeah.
Okay.
Because I was at the Angels opening, the first interleague opening day of all time. I was at that game.
Yeah, you're right. The Brewers. Yeah. Ramon Hernandez. I remember that game, and that game. I think that game was the one that got cold. It got really cold.
I was in the bleachers, like sitting on cold metal.
The funny thing is, we learned. My grandpa and I, we've gone. I've told that story that we go every year, and the first year we settled in the sun moon deck, and it was okay. But the next year I bought one of those packages where if you got like 7 games, you could get opening day. But I went on the cheap and I got the bleachers, and that wind, that was the day that Adam Dunn watched all those fly balls, and the wind just hit you right in the face. And I vowed from then on, if I have anything to say about it, even if it's upstairs, we're sitting more behind home plate or down the first base side, so the wind is stopped by the stadium. John Axford.
He pitched for the Reds for a short time.
He did.
Yeah.
Seemed like a cool dude.
Yeah, went to Notre Dame. So, cool guy in my book. So funny enough, so you mentioned I went 5 years in a row, and that was the first one, and it was the one I got to go with Dad, so that was really cool. 2012 was the first year of the Miami Marlins when they made all those signings. They played the one game in Miami, and then they came to Cincinnati for the Reds opening day. I don't know if you remember that or not, but that's when they had like Jose Reyes, and they signed all those guys, and they traded them all mid-season. 2013 was the Angels. 2014, I would like to just erase from my memory because that's Johnny Cueto goes 7 innings and they lose 1-0 because of a Yadier Molina solo shot.
Ooh, yeah.
Yeah. That was so, but there's still nothing like it, man. I would love to get back. I'll try to get back this year. Did you are you gonna do the package to get the sweet Ellie giant bobblehead? Are you doing that package?
I doubt it. I don't get down enough. Like, we're up here with travel soccer and now swimming with my youngest, and I think I went to the when we had the live show, I went to that game this year. And my wife got us tickets through her work, and I went to opening day, and I think that's it. I think I only went to 3 games.
Yeah, I went to about 8 or 9 this year.
Yeah.
It isn't, Adam, but it still sucks in March. It still really sucks in March. The wind just likes to stay in the park, and you're right on the river, and it's beautiful. There's nothing like being there, but you feel it for sure.
Oh yeah, especially like I said, if you sit in the wrong spot, if that wind's blowing out, I mean, it's not Wrigley, but it's still. I'll never forget. That was about the coldest I've ever been, and I was at Ohio State Michigan game last weekend, and my toes pretty much froze off.
Yeah. So Adam's a Mets fan that hangs out with us the last couple weeks, and so Adam, you need to come down for the Mets series this year. Get a beer on me. I will happily serve you. Well, buy one for you. I don't know. I assume you're above the age of 21 if you remember Mets guys from the 80s and 90s. So
yeah.
You're welcome for John Franco, and we appreciate the return. Yeah.
I tried to reach out to Franco. I haven't gotten him yet. I'll keep trying.
There was someone the other day. I was thinking I was going to text you to see if you'd reached out to. I'll have to remember who it was, but you think we can get Matt Kemp after we just talked about his great Red senior? Maybe Fred Lewis.
I think, I talked to Bip Roberts and Denny Nagel. They were only here for parts of basically 2 seasons. And certainly if I could get Mike Cameron, I would.
Oh, man, that'd be awesome.
1 season. And Greg Vaughn. I don't know how good Chu's English is, but if he wants to come on, he can. Those one season guys, Ron Gant, same thing.
Yeah. Well, Gant signed a 2-year, right? But he was hurt the first year.
Right. He didn't play in 94 because of the injury. That was a known
Yeah.
situation.
Man, this is I'm getting antsy, man. I was like watching that game today, the one I showed the picture of, because I found the game in its entirety on YouTube. And I was telling Grace, I was like, I was like, with how bad this Bengal season's been, I was like, I really, really need something. I really need baseball back. I mean, granted, covering the Cavs on my other job is very fun. They're a very fun basketball team, but there's just nothing like when the Reds are back. I miss it so much. Well, Seth, I won't keep you much longer. Thanks, man, for filling in tonight. I think at a short notice. The conversation was great. This was a lot of fun, just reliving all these rando Reds. So that was a joy. Let's keep in touch, obviously, with some different things we're going to be doing. Seth and I, like I said, while Chad and Nate are on their hiatus, we're kind of running the riverfront and having fun doing it. So you can check us out on Tuesday this week, I think, for Welcome to the Jungle, because we have to watch the Bengals play football still.
Well, we can watch the Simpsons version of it, at least.
Yeah, absolutely. And then we don't know what we'll be doing this week for the Riverfront Red show. With us both doing our shows, it's kind of hard to kind of figure out what we're going to do for each show. So, but yeah, please check out last week's Red Leg Roundtable. Seth talked to Denny Nagel, former Reds pitcher. Gets to talk a lot. There's a great Roger Clemens story that you need to hear in that interview too.
He shocked me with that one.
Yeah, that's a really great story as well. So check that out on this audio feed or this YouTube channel as well. So on behalf of everyone here at the Riverfront, thank you all so much. Don't forget, next week, Christmas movie draft episode. We cannot wait. And I am just holding on to my phone, expecting something to break. So we're saying goodbye now. But everyone have a good night, and we will see you all next week.